Namaskar. Hello and welcome to another session of Ek Mulaqat Vishesh, an initiative of Prabha Khaitan Foundation presented by Shree Cements Limited. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is dedicated to socio-cultural welfare and humanitarian causes. It is a non-profit trust founded by the late Dr. Prabha Khaitan in the early 1980s. The guest for the evening is Smita Prakash. Smita Prakash is the editor of Asian News International, which is South Asia's leading multimedia news agency providing content for every information platform, including TV, internet, broadband, newspaper, and cell phones. She has more than 20 years of journalistic experience under her belt. Smita began anchoring television shows in the 1990s when India had just begun opening the media for the private sector. She has anchored several television news shows, including one of India's first TV news magazines, Ghumta Aina. Besides working as a reporter for NHK Japan and Channel News Asia of Singapore, her show This Week in India was the longest running news show on any channel in South Africa. Even before India opened diplomatic relations, she produced and voiced documentaries and news reports for channels in the US, including reporting for NPR, National Public Radio. She has reported extensively for the US on the last three presidential elections, right from their campaigning to inaugurations. Smita's special interest lies in politics and international affairs, especially in the South Asian region. She has traveled extensively and reported from different parts of India and the world. Smita is active on Twitter and Facebook. She also heads the editorial department of ANI's microblogging team. In conversation with her is SAS woman of Mumbai, Ketki Bhatia. I would now request Ketki Bhatia to start the conversation and for the audience to sit back and relax and enjoy. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Smita. Welcome to Ek Mulaqat.
Thank you very much, Ketki, and thank you, Nidhi. Thank you, Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Just a minor thing that in the introduction, I think the diplomatic relations bit, that was with South Africa and not with the US. So just a slight thing. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so I want to begin by asking you, how did you make your foray into journalism? What or who inspired you?
Well, I really don't know whether it was any one thing which inspired me to do journalism, but I was always interested in news. I come from a civil services background in the sense that my father worked for the government of India and he interacted a lot with journalists. So we had a steady stream of journalists coming in and out. I was very interested in news from the beginning, though, during my childhood and my youth, there was just state-controlled television and the newspapers were, of course, private. But I was always interested in current affairs. I thought that I had good communication skills at that time, but there wasn't much information available about journalism as a career. In fact, there was no journalism course as such as a master's course. There was only diploma courses when I got into journalism. So I just kind of figured that this is what I want to do.
Wonderful. We've come a long way since then. So, I'd like to ask you, you've been in this profession for over 20 years now. What are some of the challenges that you faced as a female journalist when you first started out? And how do you think things have changed for women in your profession since you've joined?
Look, one of the first documentaries I worked on was, it was called From... I think it was Sickle and Plowshare, or From the Gun to the Sickle, or something like that. It was on Punjab returning back to normalcy post-terrorism. This was in the 90s. And yeah, it was in the in fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was 1989 or something like that. And this was when, Punjab was hobbling back to normalcy. And when I said that I want to go to shoot in Punjab, the first thing was that, you can't go because it's not safe for women. So I was like, if a man can go, and the cameraman is a man, the driver will be a man, the sound man will be a man. So I have three men in the car. So please let me go. I had to plead. Nothing about me being inexperienced was held against me. It wasn't held against me, but then I guess they were being protective to say that, a woman can't go. But anyway, I went there and I had a great time in Punjab, shooting there and covering it. My first shock was that, uh, while doing one always thought that the Punjabi farmer is going to be at the khet. The first thing that you think of is that there's a Punjabi farmer in the farmland and tilling his land or harvesting or whatever. For miles and miles, we kept driving and driving, trying to find a Punjabi farmer in the field. It wasn't happening. We only got shots of Bihari workers working in the field. And here was a documentary which I was working on for Doordarshan, and we just couldn't get it. So, you go with these preset notions of this
Right.
is what you want. You want this Manoj Kumar kind of a farmer, working there, but you don't get it. So, those were things and frankly, right up till I would say even now, a major issue for women out in the field as journalists is that there are no bathrooms.
Yeah.
There's
Oh, yeah.
nothing, Ketki, if I was to drive, say, go to Amethi, first I go from here to Lucknow, Delhi to Lucknow, and then from Lucknow to Amethi, there's not a single place I can stop to use a toilet. There are no washrooms anywhere. So, you set out early morning as a television reporter, you want the early morning sun. So you set out at around 5:30. The men eat their breakfast and get out because you don't know when you're going to get the next meal, right? Women don't eat, women don't drink because you don't know when you're going to get the next washroom and
Yeah.
when you're going to get a clean washroom. You can go in certain areas, men just get off and get go into the jungles or go into the woods nearby. Women can't do that. Even if you want to do that, the scare is that there are people watching, or somebody can do something to you on the street, or there's that scorpions and snakes and those kind of things. So it's really hard. So when Prime Minister Modi in 2014 from the Red Fort talked about Swachh Bharat and bathroom, the first thing that many of us thought is, yes,
Yes.
please, make those washrooms so that we can go to work properly.
Absolutely. No, but it's very tough, and these are huge challenges. But I mean, I have great admiration for the courage, women journalists show, because they have to go to, great distances and, go deep into the heartland of the country to cover stories. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot of grit and determination. So just on continuing on that note, Indian women journalists face all the usual threats that come with rigorous reporting for men and women equally, from physical attacks to intimidation, but they also face a continuous stream of misogyny and harassment. I know you spoke quite strongly against MJ Akbar when he refused to step down after being accused of sexual harassment. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I don't want to speak specifically about that case, just a little bit, maybe just to say
Sure.
that I felt that for propriety's sake, he needed to step down. I think this was just the day that, it all blew up and things. And I felt that he just needed to get his name cleared
Yes.
because he was holding a post which you're dealing with the public. It's not as if he's sitting as a librarian, or he's sitting, even a librarian shouldn't, frankly, any job for that matter. Just clear your name first, when there are so many women coming in, not one accusation, but there were so many women who were coming and speaking up against him. I just felt that for the sake of propriety, he needed to step down, not wait for the prime minister or anybody else in the cabinet to tell him to do that. As a man, he needed to step down. But I don't know. I mean, there are many legal aspects to it. I mean, you would know more about that. But I just feel in public office, you just have to have a spotless reputation. Unfortunately, people who are in public service in our country, they don't. I know of several people in positions of power who have used tactics against women journalists, which is humiliating, which is offensive. And it's only now, after this Me Too movement, that men have become conscious that you don't talk like this.
Absolutely.
Many people just did it out of, they thought that chalta hai, to comment about a woman's looks, about her body, and to say that why aren't you married? Why are you still working? These are things said in a very cute manner or were said. Now there is awareness that, okay, you don't say this. Not just that, I think many girls have told their dads that please don't do this, please don't say these kind of things. And it's awareness, I think, in both sexes which have come about. A lot of our upbringing was watching Bollywood movies, men misbehaving with women, and that was considered courtship. And so we grew up with those lyrics, you grew up with that. And so, you yourself wondered whether you were overreacting. A lot of it was, am I really, like, I'll tell you this one instance. There's this politician who everybody thinks is very cute, and he was very funny. And you'll find n number of pictures of very senior women journalists, literally hugging or being hugged by that politician. And he was offensive like you can't imagine. He was rude. He was nasty. There was an occasion when he saw me as an urban journalist. So there are many rural politicians who don't like us urban ladies coming and questioning.
Right.
Similarly, there are many urban politicians who look down upon rural journalists for their accent, for the way they dress, for their looks. It happens either way. It's probably because of our feudalistic society. But anyway, coming back to this man, so I was there. I had my entire crew, everything ready, and he said, first switch off the cameras, and I will speak to you off camera and off the record. So he said, okay, this is a very common practice. And while he was speaking, he was scratching himself. He was spitting into the spittoon. He was using foul language, all to intimidate me, to see whether I get grossed out and don't conduct the interview after that. Just to see how much he can push me. Now there is an option. I could have just got up, got angry, and left, right? And said that this is no way to behave with a woman. So I could have got angry, made a statement. You think it would have made a difference to him? It won't have. He would have continued to behave like that with more women. At that moment, I took the conscious decision, right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure many women will say that I was wrong. I should have slapped him. I should have got angry with him. I should have caught him on camera. Yes, I could have done all that. Or what I did was I gritted it out and I got my interview. You understood? He lost the election and his career is probably over. He got his just desserts at some point of time. But it doesn't happen with every politician. I mean, I've encountered some really decent people who know that it's unsafe out there and will drop a woman journalist back home or back to a hotel to make sure. So there are all kinds in this world.
Absolutely. And I think, with Priya Ramani's acquittal, this it's definitely a positive step, and maybe more women will feel encouraged to speak up about things like this. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about Asia News International. Now, ANI is projected as a complete content house, providing text, video, and picture content for TV, print, mobile, and online media, all under one roof. So can you tell us a little bit about how ANI functions and your role as the editor in
Yeah.
ANI?
So, Kirti, when we started out to work with ANI, I mean, we were making anyway documentaries and we were making news for international broadcasters. I was reporting for international broadcasters. We were doing all that. We also saw that there was immense amount of interest coming towards India. India hadn't yet started liberalization. The process was still on, but there was a lot of interest about India. Then came liberalization and opening up of the Indian economy. And when that happened, the interest got doubled and trebled over. Then private television channels started, and we saw that there was room for expansion of news coverage in India. People wanted video, video news, not just print news. So then there were these channels which opened up, and there was such a hunger for visual pictures. So we got into the news agency business. So what we do at ANI is that we cover India for all channels in India and abroad. And so over 180 countries get video from ANI, which covers India for the world.
Okay.
They get they get some 60, 70 stories or 50 stories, depending on what they were. When I see stories, I mean reports, but just raw video. It's not a voiced over piece with an anchor and all that. Not that. Just like, for example, it could be, COVID vaccines coming out, or it could be the Priya Ramani case. It could be sound bites, visuals, whatever. So that is covered for international news, and for domestic news also we cover video, we cover, like I said, like you said in your intro, that it's all one-stop shop. So there are these edited videos which we give them, we give voiced over pieces, we give raw footage, we give live footage. So it's a subscriber B2B business.
Okay. So, and a lot of your content creation and content dissemination to various media platforms.
Yeah, so I'm in charge of the editorial, which means that I see that the content meets with certain standards, and that we don't get beaten, that we are top.
Now, for over 20 years, you have seen and reported amidst a changing media landscape. Now, while growth has become stagnant in the media, and please, I'd like you to comment on that as well, respectability, I feel, is at an all-time low. What do you think is ailing the media today?
Several things ailing the media, but I think we are also the favorite punching bag. Everything wrong seems to be the mistake of the media. I get it that it's so easy to lay the blame on us, especially television, because I think everybody's sitting and watching, and everybody has biases in their mind, Ketki. So if I like a particular government, anything that I see which is contrary to that, I get really angry and say, "Ye bik chuka hai, ye sold out hai." So, the thing is that we are all hunting for that perfect news channel, for that perfect newspaper which mirrors our biases. That doesn't happen, because all of us have very, very strong views now. It's not as if we are neutral. I mean, when I say we, I mean you, me, everybody, viewers, readers. None of us are apolitical, none of us are neutral, but we expect the media to be neutral, and rightly so. There should be, as much as possible, an unbiased media in our country. Unfortunately, it's not so. I totally agree with you that when people say that it's at an all-time low, I understand what people are saying, and I don't totally disagree. It is extremely noisy. Television is extremely noisy, and sometimes it's embarrassing to see some of the reports, some of the debates that that pass off as news. It's also that when people say that there is no credibility left in the media, I beg to differ, because if there wasn't credibility, people wouldn't watch it. People would just switch over and move to getting their news from newspapers, go back to the newspapers. That's not happening. So I think there is anger at the media, but there is not a sense of hopelessness about the media. People still think that a course correction will happen, and it is happening to some extent, I feel. Maybe I'm being over optimistic, but I think there is.
But do you feel in today's times you feel compelled to take sides, like you were saying? I mean, do you feel like you can have a neutral view?
I don't believe in a neutral view in every story.
Right.
See, you can't really, certain environment issues. How do you have a neutral view when it comes to complete deforestation in a particular area,
Right.
or choking plastics in a particular area? You just can't have a neutral view. Politically, yes, I understand that I think it should be unbiased. Neutral and unbiased may have a difference. So when we cover news, we try our best to give all our channels both points of view, right? If a riot is happening, we try not to cover a riot live. Nothing is given live. It's given, it's called deferred live, which means that if there is an anti-terror operation happening, or if there is rioting happening, we record it and we view it quickly, and it's put out 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later. If it is extremely gross, then it is not put out at all. If the anti-terror operation is going on and there are lives at risk, either of the security personnel or of people inside who are being taken out, or terrorists or whatever, then only after clearance from security forces do we put it out live. So we practice all those, what's it called, checks and balances. There are firewalls in place before we put all this out. So an extremely neutral person would just put it out there. Say, even say, suppose somebody has been caught, like an Indian spy has been caught. I know that he's an Indian spy because I've got information. Uh, do I say that an Indian spy is caught? Suppose I get a call and say that, look, that spy's life is in danger. Just wait till we can ensure that he's not killed or whatever. I'm just giving you a random example.
Right.
If I get a call like that, then as we take the editorial decision in our organization, I don't expect it out of another organization. So we take the editorial call that we can hold on to this for half an hour. But I am lucky in that respect that I don't have that kind of TRP rating fight to go into.
Right.
But the other channels have that, right? So I don't blame them at times that in this surge for competition, and especially when ad revenue is drying up, sometimes some editors do take the call that they will go ahead with it because ensuring safety of life and property is the job of the security forces and not of the journalists.
That's an interesting perspective. I want to ask you about, whether you approve of Arnab Goswami's style of reporting, the shouting, the histrionics. I mean, you were talking about TRPs right now. So what is your opinion of Arnab's style of reporting?
So disclaimer first, Arnab's channel is a subscriber, so I will not make a quality comment on his show particularly. He's also a friend, as is his wife. See, everybody has their way of reporting, their style. Love him or hate him, the fact is that he draws immense amount of hate as well as love. There is no mid-level when it comes to Arnab. There are many people who say, friends of mine who are very angry with me that I go on his channel. There are many friends and relatives who are very happy that I go on his channel and come on the debates, and they say that he's the best and stuff. They completely idolize him. So there's no midway when it comes to Arnab.
So you spoke out quite vociferously when he was arrested. And most citizens, whether they agreed with him or not, they were clearly unhappy at the treatment he was given. So I think there was largely agreement on that. But it was also felt that he received special treatment when he was granted bail very swiftly. Now, do you feel that Article 14 of the Constitution, which grants us right to equality, is being adhered to selectively? I mean, you have other human rights defenders and journalists like Siddiqui Kappan, poet Varavara Rao, who was just let out on bail, just days ago. Have been or had been languishing in jail and have been meted out with starkly contrasting treatment. So, do you feel that he received special treatment?
Actually, I should be asking you this, Ketki, right? As a lawyer, you know better. See, everybody wants to believe in the ideal that the law is equal for everybody.
Yes.
Neither society nor the law is equal for everybody. Unfortunately, we go through these experiences, which we all know. Fighting legal battles is extremely hard. It's extremely expensive. We've seen how certain rape cases get solved, and there are others, people walk free. There are people languishing as under trials for literally decades. Court cases don't get solved. I mean, how many are there. So I don't believe that there is any equality when it comes to it. I just feel if somebody is getting justice, I'm very happy. Agar usko milta hai. And as far as the others are concerned, I think media organizations have all come out and said that bail should be the rule,
yes,
not exception. So as a journalist, I want more and more freedom. I don't believe in this kind of victimization. But I also want to say one thing. It's all fine for us journalists, but there are many activists who, under the garb of journalism, are doing activism. There's that thin line, which separates activism and journalism. And I say this, even of senior journalists. There have been many, and I've always argued this. They were involved in all kinds of things, dharnas, agitations. They were influencing, they were chatting with prime ministers to open up dialogue with Pakistan. Some of them talked to prime ministers and forced them to do, to take the Lahore bus yatra or whatever was done with China. But either you're a journalist and you're reporting and you're neutral, or you're working for Indo-Pak peace.
Right.
Do that. You're an activist. Go and do India-Pak peace, not as a journalist. Then what you're writing is completely colored with that. You are working towards something else. You're not a journalist. And I've said this with great humility. I say this, that there are journalists who are 40, 50 years older than me who have spoken to, when I was in my 20s and 30s. And I argued with them, and they were nice enough to argue back that they were using journalism as a platform for greater good. That's their point of view, but I feel that it does disservice to journalism. Whatever it is, then do that. Right. Don't use journalism, because then you're coloring our point of view. There are many who are using their television channels and the view and the fact that they are anchors to overthrow a government or to color an election, or I think it's wrong, completely wrong. You might have an ideology, but if you're going to be portraying that night after night in a blatant manner, I think you're misusing the platform and you're misusing the trust that viewers, readers are giving you as journalists.
This is a different perspective, but a fair one. Now, what do you think? What do you think social media does, and what role does it play in journalism in today's times?
Double-edged sword, Katie, because I don't belong to that generation of journalists, though age-wise I probably am, who think that social media has brought a lot of kachra up there, because anybody who has a cell phone now has covered things and has, is a journalist of sorts, because they're reporting, they're putting stuff out there on YouTube, they're putting it out on social media. So, a lot gets out there. But the fact is that if we crib and complain that, hi Tauba, this is what we have come to, that everybody is reporting anything, then I think you're not moving ahead with the times. There are many things that have happened with the advent of social media, is that it has put the spotlight on journalists who we thought were spotless, and they were not. They had feet of clay. They were misreporting, and because they were the only voice between decision makers, lawmakers, judiciary, executive, legislature, and the people, everybody believed them. And now there are fact checkers, there's social media, they put it out that what you're reporting is wrong, is plain lies. So many of these journalists have had to recalibrate the way they were reporting and realize that they cannot now color something to such an extent. So I think a lot of course correction happened with very well-known names in journalism. And I think there are many times that, I get angry when people say that what you did was wrong. And I get really livid that, if somebody turns around and says, and I put out a wrong story. And so I will lose my temper or whatever in the newsroom. But then I realize that what they said is right. What we put out was wrong. I made that correction.
That was actually going to be my next question. What happens with social media is that you don't have to wait for the full story to start sharing the news. So I think journalists face that disadvantage where, it could cause inaccuracies and lack of care when it comes to factual reporting. And it makes their job very hard at keeping up with breaking stories. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. This live news thing, it comes with this set of dangers, because the amount of time that one had to do fact checking, those who say in the 70s till the late 80s, you just had one deadline, which was 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, and the papers shut. Right. And news on television was that 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock bulletin, and that's it, nothing else. So then came, 24-hour bulletins. So there was literally every hour news bulletins coming up. And then came news on the web. So you continuously put stuff all the time. It's such a hungry medium.
And now with so multiple sources, you have, information gets disseminated at the speed of lightning. So multiple sources. So how do you, you can't how much time will you have to actually do the fact checking and proceed? You lose that.
Fabulous thing that social media did. I mean, just recently, when that glacier burst that happened in Uttarakhand, and I don't know,
Yes,
glacier or
yes.
whatever it was. The fact is that so many people got saved because, everybody saw this happening, and women called up their sons who were working there and said, upar chad jao or get into a safer spot. It's coming down. And there was one soundbite or something that I read where this guy didn't believe his mom, and she sent the visual, she sent the video, that this is happening, it's coming down, so move away. So many people got saved because of that. So it's all social media. So it's, I don't want to just dismiss it as
Yes.
rubbish. There's a lot that is positive, but there's a lot that is negative too. Yes.
So I know you take to Twitter quite often, and does the trolling ever get to you, or have you, sort of like developed a thick skin and you don't let it affect you?
No. We are human, yeah. Kitna thick skin. We're not crocodiles, right? So, to certain extent, yes. I mean, as journalists, we have to have thick skin. You can't take offense very easily, but I do take offense. I do get angry. I block people randomly. I used to block people just because they would troll A and I forget about trolling me. I would get really angry. But by and by you just kind of accept it. I've been there for over 10 years now, so you just kind of uh, take it. I can't tolerate the Facebook stuff. I mean, I don't do Facebooking all that much now, almost 2 years, because random stuff comes in on the messaging. Twitter, at least you can filter it out, but I don't take I find it very intrusive, Facebook.
So, it is felt increasingly by certain sections that journalists today are under attack, and that there is a complete clampdown on any kind of dissent. Over the last year or so, there have been increasing reports of journalists in various states who have been arrested under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and they've been charged with sedition, promoting communal disharmony, etc. In January 2021 alone, 5 journalists were arrested. No other year since 1992 has recorded such a high number. What are your views on this?
So this is, I feel it's a cyclic thing. First, one, there are more people in media. There is more media. When if you want to compare it to the 90s, you want to compare it to the 70s, there are more people in the media than there were earlier. So the number of arrests probably are also commensurate with the number of people in the media. The number of stories that get done, what they were done, number of stories that were done, reported in the 80s are different in the 90s. Did you see anything about Sand Mafia? Right? Nothing happened. Nobody talked about Sand Mafia, right? It's only when the Sand Mafia stuff got reported that arrests started happening. And when arrests start happening, of people who are in the mafia, then journalists get attacked. Journalists are arrested because there are officials involved in Sand Mafia. Same way with Naxal stories. Till the early 2000s, there was no story done on Naxals, maybe in the 70s, in Bengal and stuff like that. But all of Madhya Pradesh, all of Chhattisgarh, all of Bihar, nothing was reported. All of Karnataka. What about the sandalwood smuggling? It was happening and it wasn't getting reported. But when the reporting starts, then those who are entrenched, who were or even timber smuggling in the Northeast, all this reporting hi nahi hoti thi. So then when the reporting started, then the officials, the politicians who were involved in all this, they start getting angry because their economy is hit, right? Which has been going on for years. And so when that happens, then the arrests happen of the journalists. So I'm not going to say it's just political. It is more than political. The whole thing is about money.
Right. But I mean, do you feel like anyone who is speaking against the incumbent government is being targeted, the journalists particularly who are reporting?
Yeah, so journalists do feel that this government is coming down strong on journalists. I beg to differ. I think every government that comes to power tries to curb journalists. It's up to journalists how much they push back. Do you remember the Radia tapes, which government was there at that time? It was the Congress government, and what the maximum number of arrests which have happened in Maharashtra. There's a coalition government. So, the point is, in West Bengal, in Uttar Pradesh. So it's happening everywhere. The larger the state, there are more journalists working, the more arrests which are happening. Obviously, in Sikkim, there'll be fewer. There's fewer newspapers. There's fewer interest. How much of reporting is happening out there? So
Right.
these are things. These are hazards of journalism, and we have to battle it. We have to push back. And I just feel that I think the government is also receptive. They are not happy with the international coverage as well as in the national coverage that's happening about journalists feeling that they are being victimized.
Okay. I have, a couple of last two questions before I take it to the audience. So, you've extensively reported on the last three presidential elections in the US. What are what are your views on the role that the media has played in the election process in the US? Because it was, I mean, the reporting, the manner in which it was covered by the media had a lot to do with, how people voted, and it was such an extensive process. So how do you feel about it?
So I did 3 elections. I didn't do this one because of COVID. I couldn't go. But I just feel that, in all those elections that I went, the media was so partisan. It used to come as a shock to me that kitna chamchagiri, like how much literally they would worship the ground on which Obama was walking.
Right.
And I was like, so much of hero worship. They were hating Trump all that much. So that is why nobody could believe the results when Hillary lost. So I remember when it was the Hillary campaign, she had done this, the results on the day of the results. Everybody reported that she was going to win. Even the Indian media, which had gone out there, they were all at the Hillary headquarters. They had taken their positions and the media was being feted like anything. They had banners, streamers, everything ready. And they had this glass ceiling, so basically trying to, and which would go, open up, and, this thing of Hillary breaking the glass ceiling. And it was supposed to be all that. And I just felt that, the winner story is a common story. I wanted to do the loser stories. That how does it feel? What is the story there? And you won't believe it, Katie, there was nobody. There was me, and there was like some Turkish channel, and there was some East European guy. We were just standing in front of the hotel. It was freezing cold. And we're standing out there, and I was looking at the results coming in, and things started changing slowly. And so when the results were changing, I said, let's go and see what's happening, how it's being seen in the Hillary camp. I was about to move when I saw the Secret Service dogs coming. So I realized that the Secret Service knows that something is going to change. So I was in two minds. Should I go? Should I not go? So I said, okay, let's go. So I walked. I think I'm extending my time limit, but anyway, so I just walked along with the cameraman carrying this heavy gear, and we walked, I think maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 blocks. We walked in bitter cold, and I reached out there, and there were such dejected faces in the media. I can understand the supporters. I can understand the party people. What was the media feeling so dejected? Rona aaya hua hai. Even the Indian media, such well-known reporters, literally crying.
Because the media there has very clearly in every election process taken sides, very clearly.
Yeah. What was Indian media's do? Why were they so upset? So I went back to the Trump headquarters, and there was just me and Srinivasan Jain. We were the only two Indian media people out there. And there was literally shock by then, because everybody had come in and we entered and we saw. Then we were being booed. The media enclosure was being booed by the Republicans.
My goodness.
Even
That's
though
very interesting to see, to witness all this.
Yeah. And I don't see that happening even in chota se chota election in India. Never happens.
That's good. So now I'm going to take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
You can click on the Q&A box. You'll find the questions. Right.
Yeah. So one of the questions is, in today's context, why has news been replaced by opinions and arguments?
Yeah.
Mitra's question.
Yeah. So Deepa's question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree. It shouldn't be. I totally agree with you that it shouldn't be opinion. There should be some opinion, but the ridiculousness of it is that from 6 p.m. the debates continue till almost midnight, and it's just opinion. There is no news actually if you switch on the television channels. So I completely agree with you that this arguments and debates, they should be like one off, 1 hour or 2 hours in a day, not the way it is going on. You literally have to hunt for news on.
Continue. Okay, the next question is somewhere there is no faith left in general public towards media. We feel it is biased towards people in power, and we get to see and hear what they want. So much is scripted. What do you have to say on this? Asks Lavi Behel.
I feel bad about this, that you have this view about journalism and about I think you basically mean television news. Unfortunately, the bias is there even in the print sector, even in this YouTube news that you watch, or even in the websites. It's completely biased. So and it is scripted, but unfortunately I think it's TV news that comes into the fore, and everybody looks at TV news and expects so much more out of television than they expect out of newspapers or websites. And I agree with you that a lot of it seems like it's scripted, and it might be scripted for all you know. These are the pitfalls, I think, of uh, an economy which is in the downturn, and where advertising is what news media sustains on advertising. And when the economy isn't on an up, then advertising, in fact last year it went black literally. Those who had even committed to ads, they cut it short. So people, I think, are getting funding from local governments, from state governments. So I think that it does get tinged. Hopefully there will be course correction.
Let's hope so. I'll take one final question. Are there any regulations about holding back news for security reasons? Asks Nalini.
Yeah. So Nali, there are a number of norms, number of regulations, number of things that we have to adhere to. I spoke about it a little while ago about like anti-terror operations, or when there is a security operation on, if there are riots going on, and the police hasn't reached a particular area. So they sometimes they call us up and tell us that or put out an advisory to the media that please do not shoot in that area, or do not put out live visuals because it's taking us time to reach there and bring the situation under control. So these kind of things are there. Unfortunate part is that we in the broadcast media and in the print sector, which is regulated, we adhere to these norms and laws. But now there is a whole different world of social media, of your YouTube journalists, of websites. They have no such rules. Now supposedly they're going to come under regulation, but they can put out anything out there. There is nothing happens to them unless somebody takes them to court. So it's not as if they come under any government rules and regulation. They can put out anything, just anything.
Just one final question. I'm not sure what regulations. Kamal Uppal asks, comment on the latest regulations on media and social media.
Yeah, so I don't want to comment on this right now because it's just happened a couple of hours ago. I need to read the fine print on this. But it was coming. There was talk about, that these regulations will come and social media will be brought in, because, this whole upsurge in this Khalistan movement and things, the government was caught unawares about how it's going to happen, how it's going to go forward. And I think they, to some extent, I think they lost the plot in being able to control the situation. And that whole episode, what happened on 26 January, when the not the Indian flag was put up on the Red Fort, I think that came as a shocker and a shame actually what happened. So social media was going to come under some kind of a regulation. Worldwide, they've been saying this because, I mean, if you remember, even during the US election, there was a whole lot of talk about how US election has got influenced by social media, and that regulations should be put in place. So, but there are freedoms which are guarded very strongly. So I don't know about what's going to happen in India, but there are regulations which are going to come into place. Yes.
I think that there is a definite need for it. So let's hope this is going to be, used in the right manner
Yeah.
going forward.
Especially, I mean, those of us, I mean, my children are older, but those who have young children, preteens, they're all worried about us, the screen time that children have, which can't be monitored. It's impossible to monitor what kids watch on the net. So there is talk about how parents, really teachers, parents, people in the education world, they all are talking about how some kind of regulation needs to be put. You just can't have anything and everything out there. The young minds are getting affected.
Right. So I'm going to wrap up the session with this, Meeta. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to come to Ek Mulaqat. And a big thank you to the audience for taking your time out and listening to us. Thank you.